Welcome back to the Global Landscapes Forum 2019 here in very sunny Bonn. I'm Natasha Elkington, your TV host for this weekend, and I have the pleasure of speaking with Martin Frick, the Senior Director of UN Climate Change this afternoon. Thank you for joining me. Thank you. So Martin, tell us, what do you predict the main outcomes of the current climate conference meeting will be?
Well, this is a preparation meeting, so there will not be a spectacular outcome, but we are making very good progress in what is really the remaining key question to operationalize the big Paris Agreement. That's market mechanisms, basically payments, transfers, that kind of thing.
Okay, great. So what role does innovation play in tackling climate change?
I think it has a massive role to play, and I think also it's one of the key obstacles not thinking about it. Let me explain what I mean. If you take future climate plans looking into 2030, 2050, it's obvious that the technology we have today is not the technology that we're going to have in 20 or 30 years from now. So you need to have a certain boldness, a certain optimism built into your plans, and that's not always easy.
Okay. And in terms of, the theme of this conference is rights in the landscape. So how important are rights in terms of, landscape restoration?
Well, let me start with landscape restoration. I'm absolutely certain that what we have out there, our commitment to stay below 1.5 degrees centigrade warming, is impossible to do without large-scale landscape restoration. We absolutely need it. And the second bit of your question
was the rights. Why are rights important in restoring?
Well, everything starts in economic activity with knowing on what piece of land you are sitting. And we know that tenure is the central question in land restoration. So let me connect that. Every country has, under the Paris Agreement, an obligation to do a climate plan. These climate plans need to be meaningful, and they can only be meaningful if they include all parts of society. And you give a voice to those who don't have a voice, smallholder farmers. It's obvious that they will need to claim their land rights as a fundamental precondition for large-scale land restoration. So I think this process of defining what we call NDCs, nationally determined contribution, the climate plans of countries, are a massive opportunity really to claim these rights and say we need to have 10-year security in order to move ahead into a climate resilient future.
And how difficult do you think it will be in securing rights for local communities on the ground to make sure that this change does happen?
Well, I think there is tremendous progress that is being made there, and technology plays a role, because today it's very easy to GPS locate an area in which there is a traditional tenure system. So it's possible to bring traditional tenure into a modern tenure system. And I think the climate crisis, the emergency that we are facing, can actually help to get clarity into the tenure situation, because it is so obvious that we need it.
Right. And then in terms of even traditional knowledge, before, the way we've been doing things, we've kind of been ignoring local communities and their traditional knowledge and how they handle land. But I think now we're seeing the importance of that in how we're going to tackle the climate crisis. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, if you look at the future of farming, I would say the future is closing loops, having highly integrated agriculture, closing systems. It's an intensive model of agriculture. If you look at agroforestry, you're using every inch of the land. You're closing loops, you're creating synergies. That is, of course, very, very labor intensive. So in the old logic, being labor intensive meant, oh, you don't want to do that. You really want to have a system in which 10 automatic harvesters do that for you. I think we need to change our thinking. There are so many people on this planet. They need livelihoods, they need work, and we need to have an intensive but organically intensive managed land system. And that is exactly what traditional knowledge has. It tells you when to plant, it tells you what plants to plant together. It's creating these microsystems that actually mimic nature, and that is what works.
Yes, sure. In terms of civil society movements around climate change action have gained momentum in the last year. So how can we leverage that on an international level to really trigger policy changes?
Well, There is a point that makes me very happy. And in the last climate conference that we had in Katowice in Poland in December, the indigenous peoples really had a breakthrough, being recognized under the convention, having their platform, being able to make their point. They are now a strong and vocal and absolutely necessary stakeholder group in our process. And it makes me personally happy because I can share that 10 years ago I worked on the platform for indigenous rights from a human rights perspective.
Okay.
Now they're in the climate perspective. We need to hear them, we need to learn from them.
And just my last question, in terms of like with governments and the resistance, how is that, has things changed from the past in terms of recognizing rights of people, on the landscape? Because before it's like, governments kind of sideline the local communities a little bit, but is their mindset changing? Because you have to include governments, obviously, if we're going to change policies. Do you find that things are changing?
Well, obviously, yes, because we are running a consensus process. And if you have in COP24 in Katowice an agreement on the indigenous integration into the climate process, that was only possible with the consensus of every single government that is part of the convention, and that's pretty much every single government of this planet.
Right. Okay, well, thank you very much for your time. Is there anything else you'd like to add that maybe I haven't asked you that you think is important about this conference? Or?
Well, there's one thing I believe is absolutely vitally important, that if we look into climate change and agriculture, that our consideration always starts with SDG 2, zero hunger. We still have a situation where 800,000 people go hungry to bed every night. We have altogether 2 billion people malnourished, and on the other side we got 2 billion people who are obese on this planet. So obviously there is something fundamentally wrong with our food system. And we can only solve it if we look at it as a system. So you're doing that in the landscape approach, looking at the social, the environmentals, the economic aspects. We need to do that on a global scale as well.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Well, thank you for your time today.
Most welcome.
Merci. Thank you.